Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Neighbourhoods Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I advise the meeting to note that the meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. I'm going to take apologies first of all, and I think we just have apologies from Councillor Sharp, who may be late at the moment. Declarations of interest, if I can remind members that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any businesses to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Before we actually proceed with the meeting, because we're a little bit of a hybrid meeting, it's a decision-making meeting, so everybody in the room who's involved in making a decision is here in the room, so all the members are here. But we do have a number of officers and other members who are following us online. So could I ask them to go around and introduce themselves, and then I'll ask those on screen if they could also introduce themselves. So my name is Councillor Kate Booth, and I am the Chair of the Housing and Neighbourhoods Overview and Scrutiny.
Good afternoon, my name is Councillor Mary Locke.
Continue around the room. Councillor. Mohammed, could you introduce yourself?
Sorry?
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Would you introduce yourself? Yeah.
Well, I can't hear.
You just want to say no more.
Oh, right, sorry. I'm Councillor Mahmoud Hussain.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Councillor Marge Bridle. Councillor Deirdre Alden.
Councillor Kenwood.
Christian Skade.
And Jane Bowles.
And could we ask on the screen, so if you probably can't see the screen, so if we could start with Cabinet Member for Homes and Neighbourhoods, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Shabrana Hussain, Cabinet Member for Homes and Neighbourhoods.
And Street Scene.
Hope you can hear me. Councillor John O'Shea, Cabinet Member for Street Scene and Parks.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to have to go on initials. So JJ, please.
Good afternoon, John Jameson, and I'm Head of Housing Management.
Thank you. MS.
Hello there, it's Martin Smith. I manage the Waste Enforcement Unit within Street Scene.
Great, very positive. JB.
That's not.
BS.
That's found in the live stream.
Oh, right, okie dokie. And we have got, I can see the Chair of Licensing. Councillor, would you like to introduce? Okay, and finally, Julie, is it?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yes, Julie Griffin here. I'm the Managing Director for City Housing, Birmingham City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So everybody in the room should know, everybody on screen, and everybody on screen should know who's in the room now. Thanks very much. So if we can move on to number 4, Action Notes and Action Tracker. As far as I am aware, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, there are no further updates on the Action Tracker since it was published. Councillor Bryan.
On the issue of fines, this is in relation to fly tipping, but I think that there was an action about Phil coming to this meeting. Did you say is Phil here?
He is here, he's on the screen.
Okay, so Councillor Davis is here, that's good. So is that how we were going to deal with this issue of fines? We wanted, didn't we, when we did our review of fly tipping that has led to various actions. One of the issues that we picked up was that Birmingham tends to issue fines only in very kind of serious cases where there's all this evidence and so on. but we discovered that other councils were more liberally using fines for much kind of smaller cases, and that's what we wanted to see or explore Birmingham to do. So, is this is what's going to happen? Is it at this meeting?
I think
this is how we're
this-
dealing with this issue.
I think this will probably come up in our conversations this afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah, so it will be part of the progress report we're doing in number 5.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. That it's come up quite a long, well, a heavy touch in the sense that
Yeah.
they have to have a lot of evidence before they seem to move forward in Birmingham. But I think that will come up. If it doesn't, we'll add it on.
Okay, thank you. And then the only other issue was how we're dealing with the letter that we want to send from the committee to Councillor Hussain.
Yeah, so I thought we'd discuss that when we've gone through the work programme.
Okay.
And then we just want some clarification from Councillor Wood about what you might want us to add to that letter. I think apart from that, everybody else seems content on and taking their silence as contentment. So we'll deal with those as we come through. That's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks very much. So number 5, the progress report on the implementation of reducing fly tipping, and joining us for this we have Councillor John O'Shea, Cabinet Member for Street, Sea and Parks. I don't think we've got Darren Share with us at the moment, and I'm delighted that Councillor Bill Davis has been able to join us from Licensing and Public Protection. So could I hand over to you, Councillor O'Shea? Or do you have another officer who's going to take?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to chase up Darren because he was in another meeting regarding the service. So he was going to join us. I'm just going to remind him that we're just on to the item now, see if I can get him in to help us. But you have the updated report in there. As you can see, we are making progress towards those targets. We have also made some progress with regards to the CCTV monitoring. We have a number of sites that have already had some monitoring work done. 4 more sites were approved at the start of February and had their cameras installed. We've had 6 sites across the city to be installed over the course of this month. Those are a mixture of sites where we actually had to go to court. Martin will talk a bit further under RIPA to get approval because of the sensitivity of the sites. But the other sites we're doing now are less sensitive and we're able to manage under our own process. We're also now starting to progress the actual production of the Grime Watch videos. We have some data to work on with that. And having a precise date for the launch of that, but we are not too far away from that at the moment. Because we've only just finalised our publication process. Having to work through legal on that one. So that's been moved forward. And those are really the 2 issues we came to talk about. It's also the issue about we'll talk to Councillor Davis regarding the issue of fines and that process there. But you've got the report, happy to take questions and comments.
Okie doke. Can I welcome Councillor Harmer? Can I questions? Councillor Walden.
Thank you. I think you just said 6 sites for the cameras. Can you tell us where they are?
I'd rather not. There are 4 sites that have been installed. There are 6 more sites to be installed. They're across the city, and they are based upon data that we have. Martin, I don't know if you want to come in and discuss it any further, but I'd rather not publicise the sites if we can avoid it at this stage.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The sites which are currently covered by cameras are covered under authorisation from the court under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. So for that reason, we're not able to make those locations public by virtue of the fact that it's directed covert surveillance. The sites going forward, though, they are sites which have been identified as having high levels of smaller scale fly tipping. And as part of the ongoing review that we have as well, we're also now triaging and looking at requests that have come in from various sources, including from petitions, including directly from residents and businesses. So essentially the process going forward is to review those principally and it won't be covert surveillance in the main that we will use going forward. But the sites that are covered at the moment, we're not able to publicly disclose where they are.
You say that. You think you'd like to spread around the city, are they? For example, are they 6 in one ward, which I don't think we think was very fair. So we want to know, are they in the inner city, are they in the outer city, are they spread around geographically? So I think some information, you know, it was our report that came up with this. I think we deserve to have some information.
I think it would it be possible perhaps to let us know the number of different wards in the number of constituents, and then to the north of the west city?
Where is it better?
Yeah.
Sorry, there was a lot of feedback on that particular item. Martin, are you prepared to disclose the very vaguest locations in terms of ward locations for these or not?
Yes, I can't see that being a problem at all at a ward level. I can certainly circulate those for you.
That would be really helpful, thank you. Councillor Byron.
Well, just on this issue, so the other council that we got this idea from didn't seem to have to go through a court process. And I think Martin's saying that in the future we won't have to do this, but I don't understand why now we do have to do it. Why couldn't we just use the process that we're going to use in the future? Could you just explain that? And then the other thing I was going to say was that, about the website. So Councillor O'Shea has suggested that that's in process, the Grime Watch video, or whatever we're going to call it, it's being set up. Have we, I mean, presumably we'll all be informed, Councillor O'Shea, that that has gone live, and that, you know, that we'll have instructions about, I presume, on the website about what residents do in order to assist with catching these people. So that was that question. And then the other thing I was going to mention was you sent us a day in the life of the, I think Barking and Dagenham, or was it Nottingham, called them community protection officers. We're calling them neighbourhood enforcement officers. That was quite interesting. But I suppose what we really want to know is, do we feel at this stage that they're making a difference? And I presume that we are trying to measure that. I think you said that last time. When will we be able to get a bit more of a report, because that's what I'd like to see, on what impact they're having and what difference they're making? And are they in contact? Because I remember the other council saying that one of the things they did was to meet with local councillors on a, whatever it was, a fairly regular basis, to discuss issues and, you know, use the councillors' local intelligence to make as best use of that resource as possible. So is that happening, or are these people just out there without any reference to the local members? Thank you. Those are the two things.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll leave Martin to come in on the process, why we use RIPA and why we're going to be using our own process moving forward on that one. Yes, when we get around to production of the video and distribution of that, you will all certainly be informed of that, because I'm hoping also we'll get some decent media coverage about it as well. And the officers, they have been taken off their enforcement duties for a few weeks. They should now be returning to those. They were taken off to do a bit of additional COVID enforcement work and COVID marshal work, but they should now be returning to their normal duties, and they should be making contact with the relevant ward councils. That was something I have requested, and it should be happening. Marty, you want to come in on the process regarding RIPA and deployment of cameras?
Yes, Chair. Hopefully that sound is a bit clearer than it was previously using the phone. But very simply, in terms of camera deployments, if there are particular circumstances that are present at the site, We have to have regard for that when we're planning for cameras. So, for example, at locations where it's a mixture of offending, so it could be people within the local community, but it could also be people bringing material to fly tip. There are situations where we actually don't want it to be known that there are cameras there. And when you're doing that, that falls into the category of covert, and that's the situation where we're legally obliged to apply to the court for approval. We can't conduct covert or what's called directed surveillance ourselves without court approval. So for those particular situations, that's why we would go to court. In terms of other locations where we wouldn't apply for court, and for example, the way in which Barking and Dagenham would have been gathering their evidence, that's the way that we will proceed for most of our sites, where we don't think there's likely to be an element about diverting offending if we were to put cameras up. And actually part of putting the cameras up is to try and deter people as well. So going forward, most of the deployments will be under, it's a code of practice issued by the Office of the Surveillance Commissioner. And that's what we will use most of the time. But there are some situations and circumstances where we're not legally able to do that, where we require court approval. But it's interesting, last week we had our Core Cities Local Authority meeting, and there's been a lot of interest in the policy that's been developed here, and there's now a public policy on the use of imagery, because it's not just about the imagery that we capture from the cameras, it's the wider scope of being able to publicise the details of offending to support deterring other people offending. So we were slightly different from Barking and Dagenham in that their policy came in before the revisions to the Data Protection Act and the General Data Protection Regulations. So we had to have quite a bit more consideration than Barking and Dagenham would have had at the time, simply because of new legislation. But it's nice to see that there's interest from other councils to follow what we're doing in Birmingham. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bryan.
So just to clarify then, so in normal circumstances, we're not going to have to go through this court procedure. That's what you're saying, Martin, aren't you?
That's answer. As I say, just in specific circumstances that trigger us to legally needing to apply for a covert authorisation.
So what's the difference then when we use our normal process, which won't involve us going to court? Does that mean we put notices up to tell people that there's CCTV in operation and that we don't have for these other cases that you described?
Yes, in the very simplest terms, the route where we apply to court, it's covert. We don't tell anybody. The route where you install cameras using the code of practice issued by the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, it's an overt process. So we would put signage there, and there are also circumstances where we would contact or write to people within the vicinity. And that might be residents, that might be businesses. And we have to assess that on a site-by-site basis. But essentially, one's covert, which is a court route, and one's an overt route, which isn't the court route.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I'd like to ask the question, actually, and I suppose it's about the burden of proof. I've had a couple of incidents in my ward, and I'm sure other councils have had similar incidences. One where residents actually saw somebody fly tipping, took the registration number of the car, but were then told that in order to proceed, they would have to act as witnesses in court, at which point they didn't feel they were able to do that. And another one where we found fly tipping which contained names and addresses, the name and address, several times, of someone within the fly tipping. Now, in both those cases, I can understand, whereas the level of evidence wouldn't have been strong enough for a court, but I was quite surprised that a letter wasn't sent saying you've been observed doing this, or your van has been seen in this area doing this, your address appeared amongst fly tipping, just as a kind of shot across the bows. So I'm just wondering, is that something that we're considering doing? Because I know a number of other councils do, not actually proceeding to court, but actually saying you have been seen, it has been logged, we saw it happen.
Yes, through you, Chair. The situation where material is found in bags, for example, names and addresses on envelopes, even if we don't have a witness that's willing to come forward, or even if we don't have the material that was observed, writing to the alleged offender is part and parcel of the process, really, under Section 46 of the Environmental Protection Act. So written warnings do form part of our process for those, because it is important, we feel, to bring it to people's attention. There might be reasons why it's occurred. It might be an error, a mistake, whatever the reason is, we would seek to do that. Where it's vehicle-related offending, we assess them on a case-by-case basis, and that can be related to the type of vehicle. Is it a van that comes? Does it look commercial? Is it a personal car, etc.? As to whether there's one incident or two incidents. So the vehicle-related ones, sometimes we do contact them, but that might be a demand for information about who was driving a vehicle at a date and time, because we have the power to do that. On other occasions, it might be contacting them to ask for an explanation as to what they were doing and why they were doing. So we can do that, and we do sometimes do that, even if we don't have the evidence with which to prosecute. For example, if a witness doesn't feel comfortable in coming forward. We're trying to cover all aspects, really, so not just deal with the ones where we've got good evidence. It's important to try and deal and engage in the widest sense with those people who we believe or we know have offended, but we might not have the evidence with which to prosecute them at that point.
Thank you for that. I think you do need to share that with members, because in all the incidents that I've had over the last 6 years, there seems to have been a line drawn under it, and no one said to me, we have written to them or we have contacted them. Councillor Wood.
Just to take that step further, could we have a copy or an example of the letters that are sent out? And if we are sending these letters out, do we keep a log of how many we're sending out? I think that would be useful as well, because at the moment we don't see anything.
Yes, I mean, that would be helpful. I've just had one this morning telling me that they weren't going to follow through on some flights that was found in my ward with a name and address. And I've sent back saying, could we send a letter just to say, I don't know how it happened, but your rubbish has ended up in this location. So is that possible? Is a note kept? And if it isn't, can we perhaps suggest that it might be something that could be logged from now on?
Through you, Chair, I can't see any problem. I'm looking to try and formalise a system where we do log those kinds of engagements and contacts, because, as you say, it's one of those things which will help us identify the number of people that we're engaging with, and ultimately it's part and parcel of the regulatory sphere. So we can't always take enforcement action, but it does fall under the gambit of regulation and trying to influence and change people's behaviours.
I think that would be very helpful. It's a bit like the community speed watch, where you can't actually give people points on the licence for the very fact they're getting a letter from the police saying we saw you doing 38 in this 30 limit. Yeah. And I think word does get around. So could I ask for that to be formally adopted? I don't know how you can do that, but I think if we minute it as something that we would like to see happen.
And a copy of the letters that are.
Yeah, and if we could see a copy of the kind of letter that you might send to a vehicle that's been loitering, should we say, with intent, or where addresses have been found.
I did just wanted to say that in some instances, when people report these flighting and they find addresses into these pile of they don't. And you get reported to the council, and the council passes on to the department. But we don't hear nothing back saying what they have done or action they have done. Yeah. And I think it's only right, when we report something, that relay back to us saying what action they have taken.
Yes, I think that is the point. If we report, for example, a dumped fridge, we're told when it's going to be picked up. But we don't necessarily find out when we've given some evidence, so that will be really really helpful. And I do acknowledge that sometimes it can be that somebody didn't ask to see a licence when waste was taken from their property, and the person taking what they thought was going to the tip has actually taken it and dumped it. But those people need to know. And that leads me to another question that I was going to ask, which is about licences and the people that we have who tout their customers with and without licences in the city to remove waste and then fly tip it. Is there any way that the department could start to publicise more so our residents know that they should be asking to see a licence for disposal when they engage someone to take refuse from their house?
Chair, if I could, yes. So, in part of the programme ahead is to actually consider a Birmingham, we call it a tip mark, where you would ask licence providers to display on their vehicles their registration number, and we'd ask them to sign a certain policy within the city about how they dispose and handle their waste. This would be a voluntary scheme, because we do not license waste carriers. That's done by the Environment Agency. There is a whole separate piece of work about the role of national government in improving that licensing scheme, because it is extremely poorly monitored at the moment, and that really does need to be reinforced and brought into a proper footing with regards to inspections and regulation of waste carriers after they have a licence granted to them. It is very easy to get one. I think there was a TV programme only a few weeks ago where they essentially got a licence for a dog to be a waste carrier. So there is some work to do on that, but we would certainly encourage people to check that you are working with a registered waste carrier, and we have a plan to move forward to actually get people to push that more themselves as approved waste carriers. Because that way you know you're dealing with somebody who will dispose of that waste safely, and if they do not, then there is recourse legally to them.
Month by month, and at the same time, if the carers allowed people are sending this letter through that they've got, we can then.
Right, sorry, so it's a bit of an echo, or maybe somebody Thank you very much for that, Councillor O'Shea. Has any other member of the committee got any more questions? No, thank you. Can I thank you?
Fines bit.
Oh right, yes. Could we ask about fines? Do you want to restate your?
Yes, but it was just that I can't remember which council it was now. Was it Nottingham, Buckingham, Dagenham? I don't know if anybody else can remember, but that council was using fines a lot more liberally than certainly we have done in Birmingham. And reading this update from Councillor O'Shea, which obviously is linked to Councillor Davis, it suggests that, well, it says here, the council is legally required to consider using fixed penalty notices for small-scale offences in the first instance. So if there's always been a legal requirement to do that, why haven't we been doing it? And that's one question. And I mean, is it, because it's just very confusing, this. Is it just that? There's the other thing that's implied in the past in environment to enable us to go for the small scale offences in this way. I mean, what exactly is going on here? And well, certainly we want to make sure that it is going to start to happen. But the first question is, you know, what does all that mean?
I think that's probably better directed to Councillor Davis. So that falls within his purview in terms of the fines.
Okay, Councillor Davis.
Hello, Chair and committee members. Thank you very much for inviting me today. Yes, I mean, I have, of course, I'm very much aware that we've got this division here between clearly the policy side, which is represented by Councillor O'Shea, and the regulatory side. And we receive regular reports on number of prosecutions and so on. But we also oversee the council's enforcement policy, which of course is something approved by the whole council, I think. And within that, of course, that distills the legislative abilities we have, which of course is the only framework we've got. And as Councillor O'Shea indicated on the issue of CCTV, or Martin Smith indicated as well, clearly there are strict rules to be followed there. My take on this is that the fixed penalty notice tends to be for more of an observable offence. You know, littering, we get most FPNs on littering, and we receive the figures on that. Fly tipping, clearly if you saw it happening, you could have a regime where there was an immediately issued FPN if the officers were there, clearly with legal powers to do that. But the nature of the beast is that it's more likely to be an after the event investigation. That at least is my personal experience of this as well in my ward. And you know, I'm very supportive of the measures Councillor O'Shea has announced around CCTV and so on, because I think these are where we start to send a message and you know, can follow up on prosecutions. But the FPN situation could be reviewed, certainly in the context of the council's enforcement policy. But the only question I pose, and I pose this as a question, I don't have an answer to it at the moment without further study, is whether it's a mechanism which, as I say, is better used for certain types of immediate offence which are observable, like litter dropping, than fly tipping, because we are, at least in my experience, not very likely to see the fly tipping happen. We're more likely, if we're fortunate, to gather some CCTV and then be able to follow it later, or to find documentation in the fly tip materials. And I entirely support the chair's point there about the need to follow up with letters and so on, even if the officers don't think there's a prosecutable case, because I've had a number of cases in my ward where I have produced that evidence to the officers. We did have one case where we successfully prosecuted £6,000 fine, which was very welcome. In other cases, the view was we couldn't prosecute. But again, I was not really satisfied that we'd done anything in terms of communicating to the persons whose fingerprints appeared to be on the scene of the crime through a letter, that we had this information and effectively, you know, they were in the frame. So I think that's my immediate comment on the FPN situation. From a licensing point of view, we would be happy to review the current situation with the cabinet member and so on. But I think it would require us to look at the council's overall policy in terms of that, enforcement policy.
Thank you for that.
Can I come back after Roger, maybe? That would be...
Oh, Roger, did you?
Yeah, okay, so that seems to beg a few questions.
Yes.
So do I take it from that we currently are not issuing any fixed penalty notices for flight tipping? That seems to be the implication, which, and I take the point that, you know, there may not be, it may be that most fly tipping is investigated after the fact, but surely some is seen, and therefore there should be some fixed penalty notices being issued for it. And then that leads on to a question that, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, the burden of proof on a fixed penalty notice is low, and that's the whole advantage of it. Surely, therefore, it would be possible not to just use dedicated officers as with, all of it. You could train a wider body of council officers. I mean, in the last week, I've seen several people throwing bags of rubbish as I've driven around the city. I'm sure council officers in their other duties would see that, and they could say, "Well, I've been trained to do this as part of, you know, wider training. I got the registration of the car where I saw this bag of whatever being thrown out of the window. The keeper of that car can then be given a fixed penalty notice, and relatively simple process. And, that should be made much, much easier by the fact that a lot of people these days have dash cams and you can go back and actually look at it happening. So there seems to be huge opportunity here to actually issue a lot of fixed penalty notices that we just simply aren't taking advantage of. And I just query that, because the whole point about us having the scrutiny inquiry was to change the whole debate about it and to make people realise that there is a risk that if you're walking, I saw somebody yesterday walking along Stratford Road, they just picked a bag of rubbish out from the pushchair they were pushing, threw it over the bridge into the River Cole, as if that was a perfectly normal thing to do.
Yeah.
And we've got to change, we've got to change the whole story here. That is not acceptable. If someone's seen doing that, you have a risk of being given a fixed penalty notice for doing that. The fact that we're not doing it here, we're not doing that at all, is very concerning.
So I've got Councillor Bryden first.
Well, I really do think, Councillor Davis, that if we would value this being taken forward, it was part of what we thought would work, and we need to pursue it and make it happen, because I think we're all agreed. I mean, the whole of the council body must be agreed that we want to up the ante on flight events. We want to catch these people, and we want to find them and make people aware that we're, as a council, really kind of getting vicious about it. And sorry if people in Solihull are upset that we're taking a more proactive line.
Let's say vigilant, not vicious.
Well, all right. Because, this immediately observable offence thing, surely it could be, Roger's given the example, Councillor Harmer, of officers being trained up. But I mean, if a resident like Councillor Booth's resident, or Councillor Booth or I, saw a van dumping and got the registration number, surely we could then report that, and then the fine could be issued. Yeah. I'm sure that's what the other council was saying that they did. Yeah. And they were saying if it did then go to court, because there was a refusal to pay or whatever, that they never lost a court case. That's what they said in their policy. So, I think we would urge a review, definitely. Yeah. But I don't know whether you've got any other comment to make on that, Councillor Davis, about whether we could just...
If I may, Chair, only to say that those mechanisms are in place. I mean, I caught somebody fly tipping in my ward by Chimbrook Park, and I took the registration number and details and gave a statement to our enforcement people. Now, I don't know where that's gone, but that mechanism is in place. I'm not opposed to greater use of fixed penalty notices. I mean, I don't think it's actually under my responsibility through the regulatory committee, though, because it would be a resourcing issue, I suspect, in terms of the number of people we could deploy. So perhaps Councillor O'Shea could comment on that. But the mechanisms are in place. And of course, there is a mechanism, as you say, for FPNs for fly tipping. Again, I think it needs more study, and you're doing this, obviously, which is good. And I can commit the Licensing and Public Protection Committee to have a look at this in more detail, certainly, subject to your final deliberations.
Thank you. Did you want to bring something in?
Yes, just what everybody said. The committee listened to a lot of evidence last year from Barking and Dagenham and Nottingham, and we learnt a lot. And I suppose if you go on my ward, I mean, somebody was spotted throwing fly tipping the other week in a car. They took the number. It hadn't got tax or insurance. It was over 6 months. I mean, surely, residents get in touch with us. Also, they can report it, or we report it. We need to know, even if it's anonymised, to sort of get, to do it. We've got to do something about it, because it's a shame on, it is a blight on the city. It is, you know, especially not just because it's a Commonwealth Games this year, but none of us and none of the people who live in ours want to see it. We want our streets clean, and you know, we don't want to see it. And we're not being NIMBYs. We just want to see the city looking better, and it can be. That's me. I've had my moment.
That's fine. Am I picking up from the committee? Because we do have these two outstanding recommendations that we haven't dealt with. They are being assessed as a 2. And I think what we're saying is that certainly R03, correct me if I'm wrong, has not been achieved.
Yes.
Are we happy that R01 has been? So I've been trying to find mine.
Well,
Is that
we
actually
want information about it, don't we? I mean, if we find out that they've put all 6 cameras in one ward, I don't think we'll be satisfied. So could we wait till we hear the information about where these cameras are? I think that's
No. So if we could ask for those 2 specific areas,
Yes.
the one about the cameras, the location, so that we can just get the idea that they are scattered across the city. And then I think that would help us at the next meeting. Then we could tick that off as part of as a very small part of our meeting. R03 seems a little bit more problematic. Councillor Harmer.
Chair, I mean, I think this, from my point of view anyway, the specific point on R03 is that the recommendation talks about strategy. What Councillor Davis said, well, the mechanism is in place, but what we're interested in is actually the mechanism being used.
Yes.
And that's what we want to see.
Yeah.
So again, what we're suggesting is if we can refer that back, and if we could have something brought to us at the next meeting and have this as a short, hopefully, agenda item, just to clarify those 2 points. So at the moment, we're saying we're not happy with the assessment of those being a 2, and we require further evidence in order to mark those off and close those. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have the agreement of the committee with that. So can I thank Councillor O'Shea, can I thank Councillor Davis, and can I thank Martin Smith for coming? It has been for me very useful. I hope it's been for other committee members, and hopefully if we could have those just 2 short things for the next meeting, then that will help us tidy those ends up, tie them off and finish them. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, tenant engagement review. Now, we were going to have Julie Griffin, John Jameson and Louise Fletcher. I think we've got Julie Griffin and John Jameson. I'm delighted to see we've got Councillor Hussain, because we weren't sure whether you were going to be joining us. So, Councillor Hussain, are you going to lead us through this?
Yes, I thought I do have to leave at 3 o'clock, so I will stay till 3 anyway. So, thank you. Just very briefly, as you know, in August 2021, City Housing Directorate commissioned a review of the current tenant engagement movement. The review was undertaken by TPAS, who are England's leading tenant engagement experts. The review was completed in November 2021, and a number of recommendations have been made, primarily on how we ensure that tenants have a very strong voice in all our decision making. I'm going to hand over to John Jameson, Head of Housing Management, who will provide a more comprehensive overview of the review. So, John, do you want to?
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to give apologies for Louise not being able to join us unexpectedly today. There is a presentation in the pack that really is Louise's presentation, having done a lot of the hard work on this. So I'm not going to present it as such. I'll sort of talk to it, and I hope I can do as good a job on that as Louise would have done if she'd been able to join us. Yes, as Councillor Hussain says, we've had an external review undertaken by TPAS, that's the Tenant Participation Advisory Service, who operate on a national basis. And we have a report now from them covering their recommendations and findings. And that's a report that will also be cross-referencing with the wider piece of housing transformation work that is ongoing at present. They've reviewed our activities in a number of areas and given us areas of work for us to do more to strengthen the voice of our tenants moving forwards, and under a number of areas. I'll cover those in a second, but I think also important that TPAS acknowledge that formal resident involvement is well in place in the city. It is locally driven, delivered on a ward basis. They've recognised a very significant number of housing liaison boards in the city, and that those also have a mixed tenure. That we have an overarching city housing liaison board, providing that strategic involvement in the process, together with scrutiny carried out by the city housing liaison boards, subgroup being the performance management group. They've also acknowledged the numerous approaches that we have to both formal and informal resident engagement and resident involvement. In terms of the report, they've covered that under 7 key areas, and to just give a little overview of that, the first area being governance and transparency, which is about us continuing really to promote a common understanding of resident engagement, having a clear strategy and framework, and one that clarifies the role for residents, and also includes work to develop on the annual report that is already produced every year, and how that can be taken forwards. The second area is scrutiny, and very much around improving the existing links that residents have with governance, and including business and service delivery. And also about the performance monitoring group, establishing ways to be able for that group to hear wider residents' voices, but also to be able to communicate back as a result of the scrutiny that they undertake. Under business and strategy, this is very much about the ability of residents to be able to monitor and review our resident engagement strategy, engage with us on this, and in particular engage with us on matters of health and safety for our tenants. Under complaints, that reviewed our robust approach to complaints and complaint monitoring, and it's to develop on that by involving residents more in learning from complaints so that we can improve our services further. The fifth area is information and communication, and really that's about continuing to ensure timely information and opportunities to review our existing website and how we can make that even more relevant and helpful to all of our tenants and residents. Under resources for engagement, that is about undertaking a review of resources, about developing further in terms of recognition and award, particularly for tenants and volunteers, and around developing our programmes of resident training, particularly in terms of resident involvement. The final area is around community and wider engagement. As I said, already acknowledged that how our engagement is very locally driven. So it's around how we can increase activities around engagement on policy consultations and responses, about increasing communication to residents about potential community investment activities and those sort of areas. So those are the key areas. The City Housing Liaison Board, as the strategic element, have been briefed and given an overview on that, and we're currently working with the chair and vice chair to organise separate meeting to be able to discuss the review and moving forwards in terms of the engagement strategy with the board. So we're organising that at the moment through the chair. Just some of the overarching key findings from the review, which very much establishes that resident involvement, all the building blocks are there and in place and being undertaken. But there's opportunities really that for us to commit to doing even more, to improving culture and behaviour and ensuring effective tenant engagement. To build on the accountability and trust that is already in place, to further improve the communication, continuing support for volunteers, and in particular, as mentioned earlier, around award and recognition, and around training and support. It's ensuring that tenants continue to have a real role in influencing housing services and delivery. Good examples already in place are how we consult with them regularly in terms of transformation plans, bringing that to City Board on a regular basis, and ensuring that we have the widest range of diversity in our overarching tenants' voice. Benefits of that and good tenant engagement, we can see increased levels of satisfaction, should improve services, build stronger communities and increase value for money, help to reduce complaints. Boards, of course, to ensure our compliance with regulatory standards and expectations, and really continuing that legacy of engagement that is already strongly in place and building that mutual trust. Just to talk a little bit about the social housing regulator and the core regulatory requirements, which come under economic and consumer. In particular for us is the tenant involvement and empowerment standard that we will need to meet, and the areas under that are set out under customer service, choice and complaints, so providing choices, information and communication appropriate to the diverse needs of tenants, having a very clear approach and a simple approach in terms of complaints and ensuring they're dealt with promptly and fairly. It's also around involvement and empowerment, so offering the wide range of opportunities to be involved in formulation of policy and strategic priorities, decisions about delivery of housing related services and service standards, being able to scrutinise performance and make recommendations for improvement, management of homes, management of repair and maintenance, and local officers for service delivery. And the third area is understanding and responding to the diverse needs of tenants, very much treating everyone with fairness and respect, and also demonstrating that we understand the different needs of tenants in terms of equality, support needs, etc. Much of that is already in place. If we follow the recommendations from TPAS together with the cross-referencing, as I mentioned, with the wider transformation review work, then we will fulfil those responsibilities under the new tenant involvement and empowerment standard. So finally, just a few words about next steps. Obviously, it's very important to be ensuring that we are dealing with any regulatory compliance issues. So we are currently putting together an action plan on that to ensure we are in a place to immediately address any issues. And then in terms of wider tenant engagement, we're now starting the work taking this report and the wider review to produce by the summer a draft strategy that will ensure engagement with tenants is set out and meets a number of priorities, but in particular to ensure that our tenant involvement actually improves services, to ensure that our residents can influence decision making, to build on the strong communities we have in place and make that stronger, and to ensure that involvement will contribute to and help us further increase value for money. So that really covers the report presentation that Louise had put together. I hope I've been able to cover that adequately without Louise, and happy to take any questions, unless Julie needed or wanted to add anything.
Did you want to add anything, Julie?
Thank you, Chair. So, no, John's covered the tenant engagement review, and he has outlined that this is part of a whole-scale transformation programme across housing, which we're on the journey of doing at the moment. We're carrying out a number of root and branch reviews across the housing piece, looking at lots of different opportunities and the challenges and opportunities that we've got. And I'm really keen to ensure that we move this piece of work forward at pace. It's really important that the tenants have a very robust voice in our improvement journey, as well as key decision making, and we need to strengthen that co-regulation and scrutiny element. And that will take an element of training and support as well. So really keen. I'm pleased that the review has been conducted. There is some strength there. We need to improve in certain areas, and keen to make sure that these are accelerated at pace. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Harmer and Councillor Wood who would like to ask some questions, but could I start, because I'm interested in tenant engagement. Now, obviously I've only got experience in one ward, and I don't know whether this pans out across the city, but I find I get a very narrow line of participants in the Housing Liaison Board, partly because my Housing Liaison Board chooses to meet at 2 till 4 in the afternoon, which rules out anybody who's working. And also I found that occasionally in the cycle of these things, certain tenants can start to dominate and can actually take the Housing Liaison Board down a whole separate rabbit hole. And I was just wondering how we are widening that. How are we trying to get more tenants involved? For example, once we've dealt with tenant complaints, what I would really like to see at the end of a letter saying, have we sorted this out for you? Have we fixed your door properly? Did the gate get fixed? By the way, do you know we have a tenant housing liaison board? Would you be interested in joining it? And just so it's constantly, because although we do have notices up saying the low-rise buildings in my ward, we haven't got any high-rise. I don't see that invitation to engagement frequently enough, I would say. So I'd just like to throw out as my question, and then we'll move on to the other two councillors. Is anyone able to address that?
Sure, I'll come in on that. Yes, this will be part of what we will set out in action plans for regulatory compliance, but also within the strategy, and some of the key elements of that I think will be guidance to local boards about good practice, appropriate times to meet, to allow that diversity and allow people to participate. And it's part of the wider piece of work around engagement and encouraging more of our residents to become involved with either with boards formally or informally, and by doing just some of the sorts of things that you're saying, Chair, in terms of encouragement, if we're responding to complaints, encouragement, more information in terms of improving the website, so that we can get the broadest dimension of tenant involvement in engagement as we can, whether that's formally by being part of a local board or informally by having the mechanisms there to be able to respond to us and to tell us what they think, and matters such as that. I think the last 18 months to 2 years have also been very challenging times for both the local and city boards, operating within restrictions. And I think we've learned a lot from that as well, about different ways of communication, different ways of being able to hold meetings. So we'll need to build that into our plans and recommendations moving forwards.
Thank you for that. Councillor Harmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And my point very much builds on what you're saying, though. My HLB meets 6:30 to 8 and has exactly the same issue. So I don't think the timing is going to provide much of an answer, I'm afraid. But you know, I was at a meeting of my HLB a couple of nights ago, and the HLB is fully functional. It does, you know, the members are dedicated and so on. But I don't think they might be saying that they are all, certainly senior members of the community, shall we say. They are all white, and they pretty well, overwhelmingly, live in a limited number of what we used to call sheltered style housing. So that even though the gospel estate in April Street, which is almost as big as a single member ward, I mean, it's about 40% of my ward, not one member of the HLB comes from that estate. So there are major issues. This is not, it's slightly out of balance, but there are major issues in terms of the diversity. And what just slightly worries me, I mean, I fully appreciate this stuff is really difficult, and that all you're really saying is we're going to come up with a plan. So we have to wait and see what that plan says. But what does slightly concern me is that this presentation doesn't give any numbers about the degree of those problems. So, has there been analysis of the membership of HLBs, and is it all similar to my experience? And if so, what do we need? How many members of, for example, different ethnic minority groups would we need to engage to make it a fair representation of our tenants? So just some sort of measures of where we are and what we would ideally need to get to, I think is important to have in this sort of presentation, so that we can then look at what the strategy is and assess where it's likely to make a difference to get us to that sort of destination.
Yeah, I absolutely echo that. I'm in my 60s and I'm frequently the youngest person apart from the officer in the room at the HLB meetings.
So I think some of this will fit into the next steps as we draft out action plans and the engagement strategy, and obviously consult around that. It's certainly very much around the. Sorry, I thought my internet had gone down. Then everything seemed to freeze. Apologies. It is certainly looking at best practice. One of the reasons that we brought TPAS in was to be external and have experience from other areas, be it other authorities or other housing providers. So be looking to develop some of the best practice through that. As I was talking about earlier, looking at what the other forms of engagement are outside of just the HLB movement, so that there may be many tenants out there who will want to have a voice but don't necessarily want to be part of a formal HLB. And then we've got the other wider piece of review work we're doing, and also opportunities for benchmarking, including Housemark, to be able to really develop a comprehensive way forwards that will enable us to reach the widest and most diverse range of tenants as we can.
So, Chair, could I just come back on that? I mean, could you answer my specific point? Is do we have measures on where we are in terms of, just taking diversity as one example, where we are in terms of engagement, whether that's for HLBs or whatever else, but in terms of where we are in terms of diversity and where we should be in order to represent the mix of tenants we have in the city?
If I could answer that, Chair, please. We are actually working through this now with the statistics and doing a comparison of who we've got as tenants and who we've actually then got on our HLBs and city HLBs, and that's part of our recommendation, that we understand our customers and we understand what that diversity needs to look like across the whole tenant movement. So that is one of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Wood.
Well, thanks, Chair. What is disappointing to a certain extent is that there's nothing in this report that, in my opinion, we haven't known for years. Tenant participation in housing has been an issue for a long, long time. This report says absolutely nothing that we didn't know already. The HLBs, my experience with HLBs is, I think, like we've heard already, the ones that we got, they work very well. I don't think, but again, I think they don't represent the vast majority of our tenants. And that is an issue. So we need to find a better way of doing that. I think, in my humble opinion, and it might be a little bit simple and straightforward, is that it all boils down to the management of our housing stock. If we're not communicating with our residents, we're not managing them. And if we're not managing our housing stock, we're certainly not communicating with them. And they will continue to only communicate with us when they need a repair or they want to move. There is nothing in this that we have not known for a long, long time. And yet again, we appear to have spent a lot of money with consultants to tell us stuff that we already knew. It really is quite disappointing. And I think that it is a case that we need to start managing our housing stock and looking after our residents and our tenants. You know, they pay for what they pay, their rent, etc., etc. We need to give them a service and make them feel wanted and make them feel that they want to stay in our houses. And if we can do that, then they will start participating. So I really am quite disappointed that this report says nothing new.
Would either of you like to come back on that at all?
Yes, Chair, thank you. And I appreciate, Councillor Wood, what you're saying. This is a tenant movement and therefore owned by the tenants. So therefore, what we have to do is we have to work with the tenants to support them in agreeing to move forward with the review. I understand that what you're saying, but again, like I say, this is owned by the tenants. We've had an opportunity due to the changes in the social housing white paper and the consumer standards that we have asked our tenants if we can look to review this the movement. So we've had to come on a journey with our tenants to ensure that they are happy that a review is conducted and that the recommendations will be owned by the tenant movement and they will support us in moving forward with those recommendations. I understand what you're saying, but this is actually a tenant movement that is owned by our tenants. With regards to looking after and managing our stock, I mean, obviously, I've talked to you at length about the transformation programme that we're actually going through, and also about the changes and improvements that we're looking to drive forward. And one of those is about how we manage that stock, our housing management approach. We've had a root and branch review done on our whole housing management approach. We've had a root and branch review done on our repairs and maintenance services, and also our capital investment programme. So we recognise there is improvements to be made, and we are on that journey to improve those services. But you know, as you can appreciate, that these things will take a little bit of time to mobilise, but we're absolutely committed to moving this service forward significantly. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just come back on that? What also concerns me is that we're going to end up with two things running in parallel and not talk to each other. that transformation programme that you've just been talking about, which it definitely needs done, that could play a vital part in getting the tenant engagement as well. I think the two things are very much intrinsically connected, and they shouldn't be treated as separate things.
So if I can come back again, Chair, thank you. So absolutely agree, Councillor Ward. That's absolutely right. What we did was because there's a number of consumer standards and regulatory requirements around tenant engagement. That's why we've got an expert in to do that review to make sure that we can actually baseline where we're at and where we need to make improvement. So what we've done at the moment is baseline different services, which is and then what we want to do is, and we're going to have the conversation tonight at City HLB, is how can our tenants be involved in that improvement journey and that transformation journey? How can they help us shape the services moving forward? How can they help us take the recommendations forward from the housing management route and branch review and the capital investment route and branch review? So, and whilst we're running alongside that, reviewing the whole governance and what that needs to look like to ensure that the tenants have that robust voice, and that's those and we're co-regulated, and they've got that significant scrutiny on us as a landlord. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Councillor Wood. That there's huge interdependencies and crossovers, and we need to make sure tenants are heavily involved in those reviews and shaping the way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan.
I was also disappointed that there's no indication really in here of how we are intending to improve tenant engagement, which is really what this is all about, isn't it? So I find that disappointing. It's a lot of words, but it doesn't really tell us how we're going to move forward. And I suppose we understand that a new action plan's got to be put together. And I assume what's going to happen, perhaps you could clarify this when you come back, is that Cabinet is going to approve a way forward. It'd be useful to know what timescale that's within. But, to have no indication at all of what's come out of this review, I think is disappointing, coming back to the Scrutiny Committee. And I think that I think there's a whole question around the purpose of the HLBs. What are they really for? I would have thought what they're for is to be a local way of scrutinising the housing service. And I just speak from the experience that I've got locally, that there is no way that, the three people who attend my HLB, representing a massive ward and I've got the most in my ward, council properties, I think, in the whole city. And we've got three people coming to an HLB meeting that's supposedly about tenant engagement. It really isn't satisfactory. And even the people who have come to those meetings, they haven't been given information to help them act as local scrutineers of the housing service that they're paying for. And, to say that that's all happening at City Board, obviously I have great respect for the tenants who attend City Board, but I'm sure it's not very many people. And to say that City Board are regulating the housing service, co-regulating with yourselves, I think is just, that there's a big problem there. It's really how we engage tenants at the local level in this scrutiny of the housing service. That's got to be one of the key purposes of why tenants are supposed to be coming together. I would like to see some major change, really, and major push done on getting our tenants involved. I'm very keen on local working, localisation, resident involvement. We're not doing it. We're not doing it in Birmingham, I'm afraid. So it is disappointing. So I hope that something really radical is going to come out of this. Because you're talking about your housing transformation programme. I keep hearing the word transformation, which is good that we're thinking like that, because I think in the past we've been a bit, in Birmingham, inclined to be very complacent and sort of say that we're doing it all right, when actually we're not, and we should be continually wanting to improve and get better. And, we need to have that appetite, I think. So the purpose of the HLB, I think, really needs a key look at how tenants locally are going to really scrutinise their housing service. No information is provided to my HLB about that can enable them to do that. So, why not? The other thing I was going to ask was, what other, I think I asked Julie this at the audit meetings, we had a discussion about this there. Which other local authorities have we looked at? Where's the good practice? It'd be useful to know, to name us some local authorities that presumably have been looked at. Just start, I wouldn't mind having a look, like we have done. We've learnt a lot from our fly tipping experience. Maybe, you know, it'd be useful to know where the good practice is in tenant engagement in other local authorities. So could you give us some names?
Are you able to help us out there?
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just come in on the tenant engagement movement. What the recommendations are that the tenants need a stronger voice, and we need they need to be representative of our communities. So that will mean that we have to have conversations with City HLB about how do we move that into a totally different space, and how do we ensure that we're engaging with a diverse number of our tenants. So that, to me, would suggest that we would be looking at a new way of engaging with tenants in order to comply with the standards, and also in order to move forward with the engagement strategy. I don't think that you know what we've currently got with the HLB movement is we don't have that level of scrutiny, and we don't have that level of engagement. I know I attend the City HLB meetings, and you know, I previously worked at other authorities where we've had really good co-regulation and scrutiny arrangements, and you know, and that's what we need here in Birmingham. We need something very strong so that tenants can hold us to account for our service delivery. They can hold us to account for what investment's being made, and also be part of those decisions about where investment should go. But it needs to be the whole tenant community. So given the fact that, you know, those recommendations have come out, we know that it needs to change. We're going to go on a journey now of what does that change look like. But the current movement, it needs to be changed and needs to evolve, and make sure that we comply with the recommendations and the consumer standards and the tenant engagement standard. So I just wanted to touch on that. This is quite. It's sort of holding a mirror up to us about what our current arrangements are, and saying you need to really improve and make sure that you get that co-regulation in place, you get that scrutiny in place. It's a very diverse tenants' voice that we hear. So we absolutely need to move that forward at pace to ensure that we deliver against those, and that will mean that things will change with our current movement. Sorry, I was just going to hand it over to John about the actual review and other authorities. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. I mean, firstly, just to apologise about the lack of information. We're still working through this and cross-referencing against the other review work and outcomes to start to pull something together in more detail. But we really wanted to be able to bring back to committee sooner rather than later, such as some of the initial outcomes and findings from the review, so that we can build on that further. In terms of the actual local authorities, I mean, TPAS work with local authorities nationally, so that was one of the reasons for engaging them as part of this external review, in that they have got a wealth of information from working with different authorities and different housing providers. In terms of what we've looked at with other local authorities, I'd have to ask that that's something that I can obtain and provide for committee. It's really a level of detail that Louise would have been able to give, and I know that Louise has been looking at the position with other organisations and other authorities, and also things such as how they stand at the moment in terms of some of the new regulations coming in. So with your agreement, Chair, I can forward that information following today's committee.
That'd be very helpful, thank you.
When's it going to Cabinet? The new action plan?
Do we know when your action plan's going to Cabinet?
We don't have a firm date for Cabinet yet. We are aiming to have a draft tenant engagement strategy by the summer, hopefully by the early summer. And obviously we'll be needing to look at the forward plan for Cabinet for when that will go through.
We could have you back at some point before then to
Yeah. So if I can come in, Chair, the action plan wouldn't normally go to Cabinet. This is what we're actually drafting and developing now. The tenant engagement strategy will be part of it. Will be part of our overall direction of travel, and it, and those things will go to actual Cabinet, and we're looking at summer for that. But more than happy to come back with the action plan, and with a RAG rating of what we're doing now, what's short, medium, and long term, so that we can give you an overview and some confidence that we're going to be moving this forward at pace.
That's something the committee would like. Yeah, so we could invite you back in the early summer, so probably as soon after May as possible.
That's no problem, Chair. Thank you.
Lovely. Councillor Sane, did you have any questions?
Yeah, just wanted to say here that I'm someone who regularly been attending these meetings when they were taking place. But since 2019, due to support, there hasn't been any meeting taking place. But coming back to this board with the engagement we're talking about for tenants, I thought that HLB was all about the tenants taking control of how service should be delivered to them. And when you go into these HLB board meetings, that is not the case, because the people who normally sit around the table or come to the meeting, they're the same people who attend meeting after meeting after meeting. And I think, because we don't get to the wider tenants, that's why we don't have people joining votes. And I think what you really need to do is go out to the wider tenants, and try to engage everybody rather than just selecting people. Because one people we have on our local HIV are people who lives in shelter accommodation, and they're the people who are basically, they live there, and they're also come to the board meeting. But the other people who live elsewhere, they don't actually get involved or get engaged. And I think, I was reading on this, is on page 33, and it says to demonstrate that residents have influence and decision making. I personally don't feel that is the case. And I think if we're going to set these boards up, or if we're going to try to encourage the tenants, we need to give them that influence they need.
Thank you for that. And I think, so if you're going to bring us your action plan, hopefully you'll be able to demonstrate in that the way in which you're hoping to engage a wider, diverse membership, rather than just, I think we've echoed this several times, having the members of the sheltered community who are, I think, very well represented on most of these housing liaison boards. Councillor Locke, did you have?
I agree with what's been said, and also you've got to think of, there isn't a HLB in where I am. The nearest one is across another ward, and on the Macefield, and it is well attended. The same sort of age category that I think that falls into all of our all of the comments today. But you can also include ethnicity, age, because we've got young families as well. What do they need, and things like that. And they may have ideas that could be relevant for not just today, for the future, how they see their lives and their children and so on. But I just wanted to know.
I think the message I'm getting is you've gone for the low-hanging fruit, which is the elderly who are living in the sheltered accommodation. And what we need is a step up, and we need you to be getting to those hard to reach, difficult to find, hard to engage young families People are out at work, we've got young children, and we need to see a much greater representation in those areas. So we'd really like to be seeing all those diversity boxes being ticked. So if you can come back to us in the early summer, that would be really helpful. I don't know.
Can I just add to that? A very valid point you made about I don't think, yes, there are going to be some that are hard to reach, but I think the vast majority of our tenants aren't hard to reach. They just need to be spoken to.
Yeah. So it's a little bit
In a
like
nutshell,
the idea.
let's speak to our tenants. And we'll get, and then we'll get the feedback.
They do speak to us, they don't mince their words with us, I can tell you that.
Chair,
Councillor Law.
just very quickly, you know, maybe at some future time, in in a few months down the line, to ask, invite some and talk to the tenants and get a varying of ages as well, not just the over 55s have sheltered and everything. There's across the board, if it's possible. I don't know whether it is or not, I don't know.
So there's some ideas from us. So can I thank you for coming this afternoon, both of you, and the committee looks forward to seeing you early in the next municipal year. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So that takes us as a committee on to our work programme. So just to go through that, we've cancelled the April meeting because it was post-elections going to be in Perda. So March will be our last formal committee meeting of this municipal year. So confirmed in March, we've got bereavement services, and now we've also got confirmed that they're going to come back and look at R01 and R03 for us to look at. And then also to be confirmed, I don't know if Jane's got any additional information, the briefing on the review of housing allocation policy. We're still waiting on that.
Yeah, we put the request in, that's going to Cabinet on the 22nd of March, so we've asked whether it's possible to get that committee beforehand. And I think Councillor Harmer had previously raised that. So
great, so that's in process. So that's the outline for March. And at this point, I need to say, and just let you know, I will be unable to come in March. March is a decision-making meeting, has to be done in real person. And I can't attend. My mother's having a replacement. I have to go up to Stockport to be with her that week. So unfortunately, I won't be able to share. I will be in the meeting, but I'll have to do it just through the YouTube. I'll participate in the meeting, but I will be listening in. And Councillor Klein was very kindly offered to chair that meeting. So that's where we are for that meeting. I thought we'd discuss the next steps with the Littbins after we've had our brief meeting with Knowsley next. So we've got a bit of a better idea of whether we're going to be able to complete until the end of March or whether that one's going to drift a little further. And then I think what we'd like to do is to tie that one up before we start looking at scoping out the Voids meeting, and hopefully that can be done informally in early April, mid-April. We don't need to do that formally, I don't think. In terms of other things we've got the letter to Council and saying now, thank you very much. I think most people will have had that. Thank you very much, Councillor, you got back to me, and I think you have some issues around ward plans, so I didn't want to just say, right, well, we'll send it. Is there anything in particular you would like added to the note?
I just think it needs to be emphasised to officers that unless they change their attitude from the top down, making changes to the ward plans is pointless. Because if we're being expected to come up with ward plans, that if Councillor Harmer and I and all the continually say we produce these bits of paper and nothing happens to them, they will not gain any respect whatsoever. So there's got to be an appreciation that both things have got to happen.
Do your ward committee not hold you to your ward plan? Because I have to go to my ward, it comes up on my ward forum and we have to go through it and I have to tell them where we are on it.
But we also get no feedback from officers, Yeah, the last time we had feedback from the officer was that a work plan had gone in because we were being told we had to get one in. And that was it.
I think the issue is about implementation, isn't it? And assistance with implementation of what's in the ward plan, and therefore getting council officers, that's the whole approach that we need to change, to think local about how they can enable working with us to, and residents, to make things in the ward plan happen. It's like that simple example we gave of the, well, I mean, that's sort of not the ward plan, is it? But, you know, the mobile household recycling centres. I mean, just, you know, in terms of localising that, it's about having a discussion with the local councillors about where maybe sites could be, where it could be sited. And then, you know, in some cases, they weren't even doing that. I mean, they are doing that with me now. Some of you said they were doing that.
That's right from the beginning, that they weren't doing it.
No, definitely not.
So
A bit of input from officers, coming back to say, what have you thought about doing next? What about that? At the end of the day, we're councillors, we're not highly we're not highly paid officers.
I knew we were heading there.
I'm sorry, we should not be doing, we need the support, and we've got no support whatsoever, unless we ask for it.
I think the question to me is, what has the council, what have council officers, council done differently as a result of something being
Yes.
you know, I cannot think of anything that's been done differently in my ward because we put a priority in the ward plan. We've certainly not had anything reported to us as a council. We saw that in the ward plan. Therefore, we've done this.
No. It's like my simple example of grass cutting that we have tried, you know, to have a discussion with the council officer about the grass cutting in a particular recreation park area in my ward. And it's very difficult. We want to have that discussion, and that discussion within the budget framework about how we might be able to change what's done in that park within the budget, but actually being able to do that and have that discussion is difficult because, you know, there's no kind of mechanism to think about how you can have that local flexibility. And that's what was in the Working in Birmingham's Neighbourhoods paper. I think where we put at the end of the letter, Kate, about the framework of relationships, the officers called it. And one of them was about the ability of councillors to influence services to be so that they've done differently and tailored to the needs of your area. Which is a bit like the mobile household recycling, that you're tailoring that to where you know it's going to work. I bet you there's some places where the mobile household recycling, certainly to start with, was just going in one area, in one slot. I've got 11,000 households in my area. I managed to deliver about 500 leaflets each time it comes. And I'd only be getting to 500 households, which would be ridiculous in 11,000 households.
Be the same people.
So it's that kind of flexibility, isn't it? That dialogue.
Talk to Mark, I don't know whether you start.
Yeah, we've had no problem. I think we
I just
just.
where I want it. So do I. Yeah.
Councillor say, councillor.
Gregory was before me because he had.
Oh, was she? Sorry, dear.
Yeah, I was just going to say something else. There's some, they call it local involvement budget, local improvement budget that's come through the district engineers. And maybe it's not to every ward, but I have to be talking to our district engineer and say that we want some more of these VAS signs, you know.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then she said to me, well, that's very fortunate because we've got this local improvement budget, but apparently it has to be spent on VAS signs.
Well, that's why it's suddenly got to.
That's why, yes, I know not everyone, but the wards that have got it, and blue one, have got two. Well, I mean, it's great because we wanted them, but how ridiculous to give us the local budget and tell us it's got to be spent on two signs. There's no local input there, is there?
Yeah, they have it last.
I just wanted to say, you know, these ward plans, it seems we have drafted those ward plans and submitted to the council. We don't know what's actually happening to them. No, nobody's coming back to us or to the council to talk about it, you know, whether where we are, you know, delivering on those things which we have within our ward plans. Now, also, you know, we have this a survey come through from someone, I can't recall who it was from. He was asking us what, we told about these board plans and all we told that these relationship managers or whatever they call them. All they.
Yes.
And actually, we all probably, I filled in that survey, and I went back. I didn't hear nothing from that, saying that what action what action they're gonna take. I think if they're asking us, to tell them what we think about certain things, then obviously they should come back to you and tell you, whether they can be deliverable or not.
They're getting all the samples, aren't they?
Also, Chair, if you just allow me, also, Chair, I think, this list of managers, we have from council, all those people, you don't know where they are, right? You don't know where they are. Some of them, I tell you, if you ring them, you can't get through to them, all right? But I think, what these managers need to do, they need to work with the ward council, work closely that they are at the moment. That's what I'm saying.
So
it goes back to what we were saying about the lack of support.
Yes.
We used to have the old fashioned ward meetings where we'd have officer support, we'd have all the rest of it, and they someone we remember we spoke about it as at the last meeting, here's the follow up and I've chased this up for you council, etc. Now we get nothing. Absolutely nothing. Unless we ask, it's almost as if the onus for getting stuff done is being switched onto the councillors rather than the other way around, and then we get no feedback.
Okay, so what we need is a paragraph that reflects that conversation, doesn't it? So I was going to say if you had a chat, but actually.
I'm sure Councillor Brian.
Councillor Brian is absolutely.
Councillor Brian.
Well, I've gone this far, so.
If you could do as a kind of 3-sentence.
Yeah.
Just to kind of gather that, and then if we run that through, and then we can add that to what.
Okay.
That's a good something all the line. If we are going to be coming up with these ward plans, we need officer involvement.
I think it's something at the moment. The feeling I'm having from you is we are doing a lot in terms of getting together, getting those ward plans and getting more, and then we're putting them out there, and we're not getting anything back from that.
Just in terms of the work plan, I don't know when we've next got a performance monitoring session coming.
It would, I think, be July.
It'd be July. Can I put an early in for that? And it sort of fits out the action tracker from January, where there's a note that says data from depots on miscollections for whole roads to be provided to the committee. I did a bit of work I picked a week in April Green when there were a large number of miscollections, which was the first full week in January. And basically what I did was I eventually got, after some interesting delays, the information from Depot. And we have collections on 2 days. On the Wednesday, they gave me a list of the roads that were missed, and those roads, I took out a couple where there's a bit of uncertainty about exactly what part of the road it was and so on. Those roads had 827 houses that the depots say were missed. On those roads, 22 people reported from this collection, which is a reporting rate of 2.66%. On the Thursday, the same basis, there were 1,273 people who had missed collections. There were 34 reports of miscollections from those roads, which interestingly is a reporting rate of 2.67%. Now, that's the two together is a sample of 2,100 miscollections, which is statistically quite a significant number. I mean, it's bigger than, say, national opinion polls. Based on 1.5%. Or based on sort of 1,000 people. So you're talking across that 2,100, 1 in 37, 1 in 38 miscollections are actually reported. And if you apply that ratio to the April to October figures that we've had reported to last committee, it was a total of 6,836 reported miscollections out of 2.81 million collections. which is a reported miscollection rate of 0.24%. So if you take that away from 100%, you say, well, it's 99.76%, everything's rosy. But if you take that rate at which people actually report miscollections that I found, that would then equate to a miscollection rate of 9.11%, i.e. not 99.76%, but actually around 91% collections made on time. Now that's picking 1 week in 1 ward, but it's, you know, it's well over 2,000, it's a sample of well over 2,000, and Avon Green is a fairly typical ward, but it would be really helpful if...
Was that a post-Christmas one?
It was post-Christmas, so
that is always worse than this.
Yeah, the point is whether it was, I mean, I picked a bad week, not to make it look bad, but just so that the sample... And so, you know, we've had people council that say, well, it's 99%, there's no other way of measuring it. Well, here's a way that actually demonstrates that, you know, based on this sample, it would indicate it's actually over the period that we've last got data for, it was actually 91%, very different from 99%. It would be helpful for the next, I mean, this took me, I mean, it all sounds a bit complicated. It took me about 20 minutes to put that together. Yeah, it was not hard. It would be, and I'm not very honest, so that exists. It would, if in the performance report, the next one we get for July or whenever, they could actually say, well, okay, let's pick half a dozen wards, different types of wards across the city, and see if my figures for my ward are representative. And then you could have a really quite, you know, statistically strong, valid way of looking at correlating reported miscollections with actual collection rate.
Yeah, because it is very rare that they miss a bin, isn't it? I mean, I get assisted collection bins missed.
Yeah.
But generally on a straight run, they either miss the whole road. It's not really miss a bin, is it? Yeah. That's a very interesting point.
Just not as interesting, but follows on from I think the request that came on the report from last time. I think there was a discussion about how those reports were presented. I think there were some questions about making the best use of that time. In the case of hearing from the officers presented what was in the report. Did you want more time for questions, and we can provide that back if that's the request?
I agree with that. I mean, I think, you know, they just read out, don't they?
Yes, in that last.
As long as we make sure we've read the bottom bit, the commentary, and you really don't need the officer to read it all out.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree with that.
I remember while I was a scrutiny chair, I always used to say, please assume we've read the reports.
Yes, that's
and
right.
highlight things that are of interest or of particular note or explanations of things. Don't read our reports out.
That's right. We should have time to question.
So keep it sweet. Assume that the committee have done their job and their papers, and we just need the same points that are really important. How do we get this message from Councillor Harmer to the officers who are going to come along and some, because I don't want them coming along and saying, oh, it's the first time we've heard this idea. Do we need to send, do you want to?
I can summarise that.
And then, yes. Yeah. If you put
tomorrow, I've got a meeting with the team about these reports.
Okay.
So if not, I can say that something will follow.
Yes. Is that the meeting we've got tomorrow with the chair? So, and we'll make sure that we get that message to the right officers that when they come in the summer, they're not going, well, we didn't know about this.
Yeah.
That's great. Okie dokie. So that's all that. Anything else on the work programme? Excellent. So date and time of the next meeting, we've got 2 p.m. on Thursday, March the 10th. It will be a real meeting. I'm assuming it's going to be in this room.
I think so.
And I'll be listening in, but Councillor Biden will be chairing. Call-in notice. So I don't think we haven't got anything that we need to consider. I don't think we need to consider any other urgent business. So if you can just move in an urgent situation between meetings that the chair does with the relevant chief officer as the authority to act on behalf of the committee. Lovely. That gives us a 15-minute comfort break before our next meeting with Knowsley. So thank you very much.